Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Ocean Space. We're very, very happy to have you all here tonight. My name is Markus Reymann. I'm the director of TBA 21 Academy, and with it since last year, Ocean Space. I have been asked to be very brief, so I will be very brief because there are many more interesting contributions than mine. But I just want to say that I am incredibly excited and thankful to Foscari that we were able to make this relationship and this collaboration happen, and especially Shaul Bassi, who has been an incredible ally and colleague and supporter of this collaboration. I think we'll have a number of really exciting and extraordinary contributions and presentations tonight. So I just want to say welcome, enjoy the evening, thank you for coming, thank you for being here, and thank you for this incredible collaboration.
Hello, everybody, and welcome on behalf of Foscari. I am the outgoing rector. We have the incoming new rector here, Tiziana. Applause. So I'm outgoing, but this is one of the occasions that I have the privilege to chair. I mean, and to bring the welcoming address on behalf of Foscari. It's a real pleasure and an honor because this has been one of the initiatives that we've been pursuing with the help and the of our funders and the help of our faculty intensely throughout these last 3 years. So this is a byproduct of the initiative that this man, Mr. Eric Rickmers, has made possible with his generous donation that made the Center of Humanities and Social Change possible, and all the endeavor that followed up from there. It was a very pleasing, a very nice encounter, both personally and scientifically, and become friends. And I like to think that we'll be friends for for a long time. Also leveraging your being half Venetian. So thanks, Eric, and please join me in thanking Eric and the new foundation now, and the Humanities and Social Change Foundation. Now we have a new management court that I met yesterday, and I don't exactly know what happened this morning. I look forward to a continuing collaboration with you, with the new management and the new adventures that will be will develop along the way. About the course, so the course is really a concept that emerged from the experience that we've been developing through the years under the guidance of Shaul as the director of the center and the steering committee or steering board. Tiziana was part of the board. Massimo Varlien was part of the board, and Sabrina Marchetti over there, part also of the board, that developed a scientific program, which is with a bit of zigzagging at the beginning, pretty normal, and progressively aligning towards what is one of the concepts and one of the directions that I think will be part of the next the coming years. Which have centered around the concept of environmental humanities, yes, which is the title of the course, and it brings with it a concept of interdisciplinary work that has characterize the work, the scientific work of the center, with the ambition of bringing together, technology and the need to sort of drive technology with a human take for the best purposes that you can imagine, and then which find here in Venice, one of the open laboratories. We need technology to fix what we've been screwing up for a long time, but we need thinking and vision to drive technology and not make mistakes again. And climate is one element. The social effects that climate change brings with it, and the disruption that the change in the workforce are brought about by technology, and all this is part of environmental humanities, and this encounter between technology, hard sciences, and the humanities interpreted at large. So this is one of the two things that I've been working with Shaul on through the years, and intensely, and with sometimes dialectics. How do you call it? I was to say that in English. I don't know, dialectica. So some pretty hectic dialogue sometimes. So one was the celebrations in Scuola Grande for the 500th anniversary of the ghetto, and the promenade, representation of Shakespeare, and so on and so forth. Well, I won't go through that. And this adventure, that was a huge success. Again, Eric was part of the journey, generously funding that as well. And then this program, which started as, I want to make a program in literature, so focused on literature. And I said, no, literature, why literature? Because literature is where culture comes from. I mean, that's for you who are, a person in literature. I'm a humble computer scientist, but let me, offer a different point of view. So I remember a couple of very tense phone calls, at the end of which, this is the result. I don't attribute myself to anything else than having made, an effort to let him think. And I must say he has thought it over very well, of course, with the help of many people in Foscari, and with the help, in the end, of Luisa Bienati, who's not here, is my pro-rector for education, who made a fantastic job into casting environmental humanities, which is really a monster for the Italian system, into something that has been approved by the ministry and has gone through the ANVUR, of MIUR, everybody, all the steps from the start to the end to this date. So this took even too long. Just me, I'll close it here. Thank you again, Shaul. Thanks, Eric. Thank everybody, and thank you, guys and girls. The response we had, I must say, we hoped, but is largely unexpected, and I'm really happy that this is the kind of response. We're handing over to you a fantastic education experience on something that is very visionary, and I am happy that you saw that vision and you decided to become part of it and part of Foscari, which I have had the honor to serve as president for the past 6 years and for the next 10 days or so. So thank you again, and handing it over to Shaul. Thank you.
Thank you. In a substantially altered world, when sea level rise has swallowed the Sundarbans and made cities like Kolkata, New York, and Bangkok uninhabitable, when readers and museum goers turn to the art and literature of our time, will they not look first, and most urgently, for traces and portents of the altered world of their inheritance? When they fail to find them, what can they do other than conclude that ours was a time when most forms of art and literature were drawn into the modes of concealment that prevented people from recognizing the realities of their plight? Quite possibly, then, this era, which so congratulates itself on its self-awareness, will come to be known as the time of the Great Derangement. This is a quote from Amitav Ghosh's book, The Great Derangement, that has been a great inspiration for us. The master's degree, the laurea magistrale in environmental humanities, was born as a response to this urgent call to action. And it comes from one of the great intellectuals of our time. And so today, it's a very special day for all of us. I first want to thank Markus Reymann and Ocean Space and TBA 21 for hosting us. And I want to emphasize that we have asked for their hospitality because this place represents a unique intervention in the environmental crisis and in the absolutely unique part that the ocean plays into it. Most forms of art are drawn into modes of concealment. When museum goers will turn back to today, they will see that some places were keenly aware of what is going on. And Ocean Space is also an unprecedented contribution to a fragile city, which is also a paradigm to understand the current situation. Ocean Space and TBA 21 represent that crossroads and intersection of different forms of knowledge and art that are needed to face the crisis of the imagination, that according to Ghosh is one of the symptoms of the climate crisis, a crisis of the imagination. And I also want to thank the team, the staff of TBA 21 and Ocean Space that has made this event possible, along with Barbara Del Mercato, so thank you very much, all of you. We are here inaugurating a master's degree from Foscari, outside of Foscari, because we are an academic program that does not want to remain entrenched in its comfort zones. From the very beginning, we promised ourselves and our students that we would offer the best of our academic excellence and seek high-profile collaboration, civil society, art and cultural institutions, activists, and whoever shares our concern for a planet in peril. For this reason, I want to add my thanks to Eric Rickmers. It was the creation, his vision and the creation of the Center for the Humanities and Social Change that enabled the condition for the cross-disciplinary research that led to the idea of the master's degree. So the Center for the Humanities and Social Change has been the laboratory where the idea of the laurea magistrale. So I'm very happy that our colleagues and students can meet him. And I also want to wish his initiative, or the new initiative, the new institute, all the best. And so I also welcome Dr. Willem Krul, the director of the new institute, because we wholeheartedly hope that we can continue on this common path. And we're happy that we can share this very important moment. We also thank the Humanities and Social Change that started as a conversation between Michele Bugliesi and Eric Rickmers, because it has allowed us to recruit these research fellows that are going to be the speakers today, and more about that later. Let me give my side of the story. Italian landscape is beautiful, Italian territory is beautiful, but even Italy has some very ugly places. And I can think of few places as ugly as what we call il casello autostradale, the toll booth where you pay your toll to get outside of the highway. So one day I was driving and with some German friends, we were going towards Croatia, and our friends got lost. And we had to stop by the Casello. The Casello of Trieste is one of the worst ever. There's no place to stop. It's horrible traffic, all the trucks going across the border. So we stopped there. What can go wrong? What can be worse? A phone call from your rector. So you say, the phone call, you pick up the phone, and can you say, I'm sorry, I'm not, when the rector calls, you pick up the phone. It will be short. coordinating, where are the other friends. And there was the longest conversation we ever had about what kind of degree should this be. And I was adamant, because environmental humanities, as I'm explaining to our students, was basically born as part of eco-criticism. Eco-criticism was part of literature and literary studies, so it made perfect sense to say, let's do a literary studies program that will also include other disciplines. And he, the computer scientist that he is, says, no, what is literature? And I remember telling, no, I will not go there, but say that, all right, literature is actually for me the most all-encompassing art, is, as Roland Barthes said, the trivial, the crossroads where all other disciplines meet. But, he's the rector, I'm a humble professor, so he prevailed, and I'm so happy that he did. So I really want to give him credit and thank him publicly, because he was right and I was wrong. Because thanks to that conviction and thanks to Luisa Bienati, we finally found a much better framework for environmental humanities. Now we are a degree in anthropology, because in the Italian system that allows us to include all the possible disciplines and colleagues. So this is really was a felicitous choice. So thank you for being so stubborn, Rector, Michele Bugliesi. And yeah. And because of that choice, we were able to pitch this project to many colleagues. And I'm so happy, and I really want to thank them today, because many of them are here today, for accepting this challenge. I'm not going to name all the departments, all the colleagues who are here, but it's truly beautiful that 7 out of the 8 departments of Foscari are represented, and that the students can truly have a cross-disciplinary experience that have very, very, I think, few parallels anywhere. We are part of a network, an international network of environmental humanities programs, but I think that because of this unique alliance of scientists and scholars, we really have a unique perspective that we can offer, and especially one that allows us to move beyond the deep-seated divide between nature and culture that is so entrenched in our civilization. And also because we can offer a truly trans-cultural look at the environmental humanities. And so this is also the moment to say that we're so happy to have a strong ally in our new rector, Tiziana Lippiello, who was, of course, part of the conversation of the Humanities and Social Change from the very beginning, and has been a staunch supporter, but also someone who has intellectually contributed to the idea, for instance, of including the medical humanities as part of the environmental humanities. So thank you very much, Rector, Rectrice, thank you very much. This is a work in progress. This degree has to be a work in progress. We've been working and will continue to work with the teaching committee, with the faculty members. But last but not least, I really want to thank the students. The students who are here today, those who cannot be here today because of the COVID restrictions, are going to be very much part of this work in progress. This is definitely something that we need to build together, and the fact that they have accepted the challenge at the worst possible moment, when we are actually experiencing one of the symptoms of the crisis with the tampering of the human in the non-human realm, and the pandemic that has derived from that. So my best wishes to all of you, my best wishes to the students. Thanks again to the 2 rectors, to Eric Rickmers and to Willem Krul and the whole team. And I want to conclude by saying that we could have offered some eminent scholars, and we will do that. Certainly we are going to continue to have many high-profile scholars in the next few months and years. But I think we really wanted to make a point by having this official inauguration marked by keynote address made by 4 emerging scholars, Daniel Finch-Race, Sasha Gora, Emiliano, Guaraldo, and Ifor, Duncan. I think it was very important for us to show to our students where they could be 10 years from now. So those of you who will not have been hired by Ocean Space, the very few who will not have been hired by Ocean Space, may one day be sitting there and offering the perspective. And last but not least, thank you so much for Daniela Zyman for the beautiful Territorial Agency exhibition and for being so kind as to be a respondent to our. So, in bocca al lupo a tutti, and welcome, and thank you very much.
Hello. Hey, there we go. Anyway, well, let's get started. So, good evening, everybody. I'm Dan Finch-Race, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here this evening. On behalf of the whole team, just want to say thank you to everyone who's here. We'd just like to reiterate some of the thanks that have already been made, in particular to Irk and to the team from the new institute. We had an excellent conversation yesterday, which has already stimulated a lot of discussion amongst us about the kind of direction that we're thinking about taking next. To Ocean Space for hosting us. It's second, third time that I've been in here now, and every time I just find it amazing to be in here. So everybody from the foundation, from the Thyssen Bonamisa Foundation, who have made this possible, to Daniela, for being our respondent today, and of course, to everybody from Foscari, who has supported this initiative. I mean, we are dead chuffed to be here. It's an absolute pleasure, and of course, the thing that is really exciting for us right now is to see so many people who are involved in this program, the first laurea magistrale in environmental humanities in Italy. So, I mean, we have come together as a team, and we're already having a great time, and we hope that is going to spread and be part of something that everybody is going to find the enjoyment and the intellectual satisfaction in the environmental humanities as we go forward on this journey together, working in Venice, working with partners, and working more internationally with people in Germany and indeed beyond. In terms of what I'm going to be talking about today, you will see the two images on the slide in front of you. The one on the left-hand side, you may recognize the geography of the place. The place on the right is Rouen. Just to say a little bit about how I came to the environmental humanities. So I am primarily a literary scholar and art historian. I started out in French studies and Italian studies at the University of Edinburgh. And so one of the things that I'm looking at now is the comparative aspect. So what we can learn from looking transculturally, as Shaul was saying before. And so the fascinating thing for me with eco-criticism, as Shaul mentioned, so an ecological way of looking at literature, art, and so on, has always been, certainly in terms of if we think about the major trends in the field, has been North American and British, or at least very much in an Anglophone space. And so one of the things that I think we've found as scholars, as a team and so on, is how you then put that into a space which is a non-Anglophone space. What happens when it meets things from a French-speaking space, from an Italian-speaking space, from a German-speaking space. And so a lot of the work that I've done is effectively to experiment. And that's one of the great things about being here at the start of this initiative. It feels like we are able to try things out, and then to have a sense of where we're going with common purpose. So at this moment, it's a very exploratory time, and that's great. The way that I started looking at these images in particular is through a book that came out in 2015. So this was a collection about elemental eco-criticism. So this was published by two scholars in English studies in a very similar sort of period to where Shaul works. So Geoffrey Cohen and Lowell Duckett. And they were asking us to look again at great works of literature, art, and so on through the elements. So through fire, earth, air, and water, and asking us to change our perspective. So to move away from the human and towards the more than human. So when we look kind of at these paintings now, kind of one of the things that you might have noticed first was looking at, okay, what are the human details? So you might have noticed the boats, and kind of you might have noticed on the right-hand side the smokestack, and kind of the houses, everything that is the human industry. But what happens kind of if we actually think differently, if we change our view? So fire, for example, might not be super obvious to you kind of in terms of what is at stake in these two paintings. But kind of beneath kind of everything, if you think about combustion, kind of if you think about everything that is fueling, in particular the industry in Rouen in the right-hand side, kind of what is occurring kind of in areas of Venice, kind of on the left-hand side in the Moran painting, there is kind of something there kind of which kind of asked us to think again. Similarly, kind of if we look kind of at what's there, you may have noticed kind of what's there built on the earth. You may have thought about kind of the dwelling spaces. You may have thought about the Shaul on the left-hand side, kind of in the painting, kind of leading to the boats, and asking us again to think about, okay, if we're not looking at something purely for the human presence, what kind of life do we find there? What kind of organic and inorganic presences do we find there? And of course, kind of the opportunity can then to look from the earth and look to the air. I mean, you probably have spent some time looking at the clouds at the very least, kind of on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. And one of the things that kind of this allows us to do, if we think about the air, kind of is to think about what is in the air, and particularly kind of where kind of these clouds are formed, to think about the water cycle, which I will come back to in a second. But just think about the way in which time and space are kind of at work here. So often we think about on what is a humanly knowable scale. So kind of what we can experience ourselves, and then kind of there is a distance often from that. What we can imagine in terms of Hello? Okay,
Hello?
we're back again. So yes, kind of in terms of kind of thinking about kind of what happens kind of when we look to the sky, and particularly kind of here I would draw your attention. Okay, there we go again. Stop me if you've heard this before. So on the right-hand side, so thinking about the smoke rising from the chimney and what pollution that is putting out into the air, and the fact that that heated matter will rise, and it will only a very small percentage of it will fall in the area where it is immediately produced. So this opens up a space where then we think about, okay, where does that take us? Thinking about the rest of northern France, thinking about kind of places further afield and where that cooling matter will eventually fall. So opening up a horizon, which is otherwise in this static image. And then the kind of the final element that I want to mention, which of course is very pertinent to where we are today, is to think through water. So what happens kind of if we are looking at the water in and of itself? What effect there has been on the water kind of by the sort of industry that is present on the right-hand side, the presence kind of the shipping, the presence kind of polluting chemicals and so on, and kind of on the left-hand side, this sense, kind of from the painting there that you might think, okay, this looks like a space of purity and so on. The blue water of the blue humanities, which is something, of course, that we are looking to question here, and to think about, where that would take us, to say, can we speak of a blue humanities, and indeed, the colour spectrum that goes with that. But here, thinking kind of about, the marine perspective, looking from the water back to the land, of course, that is one of the wonderful things about being in Venice. About actually, kind of here, kind of we have the actual opportunity of the embodied research to have looked back into the past. So if you think about these paintings, so the Thomas Moran on the left-hand side, kind of a British-American painter who came to Venice and was fascinated by it and exhibited his work back in the United States, and was very much part of the wonders of Venice for an American audience. And Pissarro on the right-hand side, the sense of impressionism, and everything that goes with that in terms of people like Berthe Morisot, Monet, and so on, and how this was being seen as something which was outside, something which was not kind of the traditional salon, something, if we think about impressionism when it was first used, it was actually a pejorative term. So, people were basically being told that they couldn't paint properly, that they were just giving an impression. And now, of course, we look at this art today, and it means so much more to us. In terms of thinking about the elemental side of things, and particularly spaces like Venice and Rouen, I just kind of want to dwell on something to which Shaul alluded, which is that there is a real opportunity here in kind of having the crossover between the humanities and social science, natural science, physical science, to tackle problems like air pollution, water pollution. And this is only possible where we start thinking in common terms, where we come up with a shared language. And so there is an opportunity here by thinking through visual material with which we can interface, by looking back to a past time, thinking about the lessons that can be learned with 150 years worth of history on our side, how the ways in which people were perceiving, say, early time of industrial revolution, and looking forward to pollution today, the ways we can build those links from the past to the present to understand better where we are in this current crisis. And one of the things that I just want to dwell on in finishing is if we think about the blue humanities or the oceanic humanities as a field, one of the major contributions to this has been by Margaret Cohen, in her seminal book, The Novel and the Sea. So it came out in 2010, already an excellent decade of pedigree. And one of the things to which she draws attention is precisely about the forces of terraqueous nature that are unleashed by global warming. And so by looking again at the elements, looking again at these coastal spaces and thinking about them, particularly in this time of revolution, in this time of industry, and how that informs where we are now, we can try to understand better the forces that are at work and how we can contribute to improving the situation and taking climate action forward. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. So I'm not going to repeat the chorus because I think Dan did a really nice job, but I also just want to say thank you, and I'm very happy to be here. So I'm a cultural historian, and I focus on food, and so with my talk today, I hope to give a couple of examples of the issues that you can think through by thinking with food. So my talk is titled Self-Portrait with Shellfish. My first memories of oysters star my father. For him, like many others, oysters differentiate the everyday from an occasion. A year after I was born, Rodney's Oyster House opened in Toronto, and it was here, a good decade later, where I ate my first oyster. Spiked with horseradish and lemon juice, I swallowed its saltiness, and then I ate another. Like the wines that tagged along, I saw those oysters as a continuation of a European culinary culture that had crossed the Atlantic. A European tradition with a North American accent. Culinary history on the half shell, usually served raw, but occasionally dressed up in butter, spinach, and breadcrumbs, and named after a Rockefeller. With each platter, I learned about East Coast geography, about Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island, oysters from places with names like New London and Malpeque Bay. a mix of unimaginative imperial naming, claiming indigenous waters for the British Crown, and mispronounced words much older than the country now called Canada. These names matter. To quote Donna Haraway, "It matters what matters we use to think other matters with. It matters what stories we tell to tell other stories with. It matters what knots not knots, what thoughts think thoughts, what descriptions describe descriptions, what ties tie ties. It matters what stories make worlds, what worlds make stories." The word Malpak comes from the Mi'kmaq Makpak, meaning large bay. But the first stories I learned about oysters were settler stories. Stories are wondrous things, writes Cherokee author Thomas King. He also warns that they are dangerous. Once told, a story is loose in the world. So you have to be careful with the stories you tell, and you have to watch out for the stories that you are told. Similarly, drawing from ethnobiologist Gary Nabhan's call for restoration, Robin Kimmerer, a Potawatomi botanist, writes, "Our relationship with land cannot heal until we hear it in stories." Eating oysters is not only an act of storytelling. Their traditions, meanings, and histories erased, remembered, and reclaimed, but also an act of story making. The fall before I started my PhD at the Rachel Carson Center, I worked at a commercial art gallery in Munich. In my first week, I stumbled upon oyster shells in the basement, and these shells were leftovers from Jerry Bibby's 2013 performance at Frieze London, titled "I Am a Receptacle for Your Extremities," and his 2014 exhibition, Passing Place. And so this is an installation shot from one of the pieces in Passing Place. So when Bibby moved to Europe from Australia in 2005, he worked odd jobs, including an annual stint at Frieze Art Fair. While digging holes to set up the art fair tents in Regent's Park, he hit oyster shells. Learning that in the 19th century, oysters were affordable and made up a large part of the working class diet. When he proposed a performance for Frieze, he remembered oysters as an unlikely symbol of British class struggle. Together with a professional shucker from a high-end London restaurant, Bibby walked around the construction site offering oysters only to the fair's workforce. He then collected the shells, dipped them in a latex mixture, and because of the smell, relegated them to piles outside of the tent where they were barely visible. These piles resembled the pre-contact shell middens that dot the Atlantic and Pacific coasts. Material reminders that the history of shellfish in Canada is indigenous, but that the Canadian colonial project proposed otherwise. The very point of settler colonialism was to erase these histories, but the water, the land, and the shells remember. And the people do too. On Thursday, the Sabakanakti First Nation launched a Mi'kmaq regulated lobster fishery on the 21st anniversary of a Supreme Court ruling that declared the Mi'kmaq have the right to fish out of season as a means of establishing a moderate livelihood. The 1999 ruling sparked the Burnt Church crisis, a conflict that was renewed this Sunday, as I was writing these words, when a flotilla of non-Indigenous fishermen cut 350 lobster traps, claiming they were illegal. So yes, it matters which words make stories, which stories make worlds, and which worlds make laws. A lobster is dinner and kin for some, a commodity for others, and above all, in Canada, a symbol of disputes over land and water. Like oysters, lobsters were once considered a low-class food. In early America, some colonies had laws against feeding lobsters to inmates more than once a week because it was thought to be cruel, like making people eat rats. This is to consider the lobster. American food writer M.F.K. Fisher titled her 1941 collection of recipes, Consider the Oyster. And this is what food studies does, environmental history as well. So let us consider the oyster. Life is hard, we say. An oyster's life is worse, wrote Fisher. She lives motionless, soundless, her own cold, ugly shape, her only dissipation. And if she escapes the menace of duck, slipper, mussel, black drum, leech, spung, boar, starfish, it is for man to eat because of man's own hunger. Today, nearly 95% of oysters are farmed, which requires no fertilizer, feed, or antibiotics, which is why some farmed shellfish, clams, oysters, and mussels are considered environmentally pristine foods. This farming reflects human appetites. Hunger is architect. In the words of Bill Bufford, you should be able to taste the place an oyster came from. In this still living creature, you will find the water and the food it ate. These living, fragile, handmade creatures tasting wonderfully of the health of the planet, or not. So this is to ask, how do we relate to environments through the foods we eat and the stories we tell about them? Not everyone, of course, eats shellfish. Religion, culture, and personal preference all inform which plants and animals we call food. But this example of oysters shows how human hunger shapes environments, the waters we farm and eat. So following Bibby's performance at Freeze, the next year he set the oyster shells in cement for park benches. And I won't get into it too much, but I do want to point out that this is part of a series. So each bench was named after a different city where Bibby worked on his book project called The Drumhead. And what these benches represent are gay cruising areas. So thinking about parks, outdoor spaces, so really kind of what spaces are queer people able to claim in urban environments. But I want to keep thinking with the oyster for now. So I'm sharing this artwork as opposed to the oyster shells outside as exhibited in London, because it exemplifies how my approach to marrying food studies with environmental history takes its lead from nature writer Jenny Price. So Price is based in LA, which she considers to be the finest place in America to think and write about nature. And so this is kind of connected to Dan's presentation, so really thinking about urban environments and the importance of studying urban environments when we're thinking about environmental issues. So Jenny Price looks for encounters of nature in unexpected places, in mass-produced culture, in shopping malls, on buses, and in Mango Body Whip, which is a thick skin cream. So she highlights urban environments because, as she writes, quote, "A nature out there says powerfully little about the ways people use nature every day." So like Price, I seek out restaurant kitchens, glasses of wine, and platters of oysters as moments of encountering, transforming, and reacting to environments. If eating, as Wendell Berry claims, is an agricultural act, here in Venice and in other coastal environments, eating is also an aquacultural act. And restaurants have a role in this. In 1989, the American chef Alice Waters wrote, "As restaurateurs, we are now involved in agriculture and its vagaries, the weather, the soil, and the economies of farming. This isn't a matter of idealism, but rather one of self-interest and survival. Restaurateurs have a very real stake in the health of the planet, in the source of the foodstuffs we depend on, and in the future of farmers and fishermen." So I'm bringing these connections and questions to Venice, to think about water from a culinary perspective, to ask, how do human appetites transform coastal environments? How does environmental change influence human appetites? To think about ocean literacy through what and how we eat. To study the stories that are not always spoken out loud, but instead are eaten off plates or sipped out of glasses. To read restaurant menus and cookbooks as environmental records, as historical archives. To observe relationships between eating and ecosystems and what Kelly Donati calls multi-species gastronomy. After all, whether we chew an oyster or swallow it in one sip, eating is one of the most direct ways we interact with environments by literally digesting them. The point of food studies is thus not to end with a conclusive, we should eat this, we should not eat that, but instead to draw connections between what people eat and how it reflects how they understand, construct, and interact with the worlds around them.
Hi. Okay. Good evening. My name is Emiliano, and my project at the Center for Humanities and Social Change focuses on visualizations of the Anthropocene at the Venice Biennale, with an emphasis on representations and critical reflections on species extinction, climate change, and extractive politics. The premise of my research is that the arts-based visualizations of the Anthropocene have so far constructed, across different media, a recognizable visual culture and eco-aesthetics. In this context, novel arts-based methods, technologies, and modes of visualization of planetary emergencies and futures, as well as collaborations with the environmental humanities and social sciences, have emerged. They function not only as tools for disseminating geoscientific knowledge to general audiences, but also as collaborative and experimental research approaches. The Anthropocene has thus become the object of a productive visual exploration and of multiple and often competing images and narratives of global change and future scenarios. But why look specifically at the Biennale of Venice? Cultural and art institutions like ZKM in Karlsruhe and HKW in Berlin have proposed coherent and influential cybernetic and anthropogenic art projects. Think, for example, of Bruno Latour's Reset Modernity or Critical Zones exhibitions. But I consider the Biennale of Venice a more fertile field of study in these regards because it represents the visual culture of the Anthropocene as a fragmented, contested, and conflictual space, where artworks based on geoscientific modes of planetary visualizations and on cybernetic modeling, as well as projects mediated by the neoliberal environmental lexicon of resilience and eco-colonialism, coexist and clash with critical and non-Western perspectives on local environmental justice struggles and challenges to the Anthropocene as a paradigm. To better understand why the Venice Biennale is a privileged space to visualize the conflictual nature of the visual culture of the Anthropocene, I would like to show you now two artworks presented at the 2019 edition, so last year's edition. The first one, you may probably recognize it because it was huge. Barca Nostra. Barca Nostra is the wreck of a boat when in 2015, between 800 and 1,100 people attempting to reach Europe died in the stretch of sea that separates Africa and Sicily. It is the single highest death count in a sea incident since World War II. After being extracted from the bottom of the sea, the boat was subjected to extensive forensic analysis to identify the bodies of the victims. And eventually, Swiss-Icelandic artist Christoph Büchel transported the boat to the Arsenal of Venice as part of the 2019 Biennale curated by Ralph Rugoff, controversially titled, "May You Live in Interesting Times." The press release stated, and I quote, "Barca Nostra is an inversion of a Trojan horse in the ongoing battle of contemporary political strategies, wherein the vessel of those who were literally imprisoned inside it as human cargo becomes pars pro toto for the continuing migration crisis and the political and cultural shipwreck of which we are all part." End of quote. As you can imagine, or as you may recall, the project was heavily criticized, and it was called nauseating. It was also, and for many, it represented a violent piece of white privilege ready-made art. Besides the obvious, inherent, and infuriating contradictions exposed by Buchel's project, embodied also by the exorbitant costs of transport operations of the boat that summed up to 33 million euros, what is even more haunting, in my opinion, is that Buchel's project represents the culmination of a process of desensitization and aestheticization of the Mediterranean Sea as a space of death. Not dissimilar to other deadly borders, such as the Sonora, Arizona desert, where people lose their lives on a daily basis or are being detained in prison camps. Such spaces are subjected to an ultimate form of extraction of bodies, extraction of biodata, and sometimes extraction of energy, enabled also by the development of securocratic and surveillance technologies. Such transformation is noted also by critical cartographer Laura Lopresti, who, building upon Achille Mbembe's essay on necropolitics, believes that when the Mediterranean is mentioned in public discourse, it is in fact less often characterized as a contact zone generating conditions for vitality, cultural encounters, hybridizations, liquidity, or motion, but rather like a motionless deathscape, a static and viscous cartography of wet flesh. In other words, the livingness of the sea has turned into a terraqueous death world. End of quote. Buchel's Barca Nostra reveals that when such mutation happens and is normalized in the public sphere, the racialized operations constituting what Catherine Youssouf calls white geology can eventually occur. In other words, Buchel's operation is an unintended metaphor for the Western-centered racist logic of extraction and dispossession in the context of the Anthropocene, in which disposable black bodies are transmuted into matter and from matter into value through extraction. Following Youssouf's arguments that extractable matter must be both passive, awaiting extraction, and at the same time able to be activated through the mastery of white men, the tragedy of the migrants in the Mediterranean Sea becomes a spectacle for the fruition of the affluent audiences flocking to the Biennale of Venice. The second piece of art that I'm showing you today, that was shown at the same edition of the Biennale, in the Arsenale, is instead by Nigerian artist Otobong Nkanga, and it's called Veins Aligned. And it was awarded a jury prize at the same edition of the Biennale last year. The marble glass vein is 26 meters long, and it recalls a river. It is made of Murano glass and Venato Fior di Melo marble from the quarries of Lasa in the Trentino Alto Adige region of Italy. The stains are white, rust, and black, and evoke pollution. I'm quoting the artist's statement. Marble, like human bodies, has veins. Marble and glass are extracted from the earth. According to Nkanga, mineral extraction is by definition colonial exploitation, but also a symbol for the exploration of the cyclical flux of time. The artist was inspired by a train trip from Veneto to Alto Adige, during which she was impressed by the quantity of chemical herbicides used by viticulture in the Prosecco producing area of Treviso and by the apple producers in Trentino. This prompted her to consider contamination as an experience affecting both humans, for example, the workers and the Veneto communities, and non-humans, in this case, the landscapes, the rivers, and the marble itself. Hence, the decision to use Fior di Melo marble, as its colors and veins should recall the colors of the apples of the region. Nkanga's Veins Aligned was then crafted in collaboration with local workers and artisans, a collective endeavor that involves matter and humans and that visualizes their relation in time through the slow violence of extraction. In Nkanga's work, the degradation of the natural environment and the emergence of diseases like silicosis, for example, affecting quarry workers, many of which today are African migrants, by the way, or the forms of oncological diseases affecting the workers of the oil fields of Nigeria and Ghana, are here represented by the stains on the veins of the marble that gradually turn from white to black. I had to split the image because the artwork is 26 meters, but you can imagine that color gradually changing. In opposition to Buchel's Barca Nostra, Nkanga's piece is a reflection on the shared experience of extraction, even when its effects are significantly distant in time and space. As a transformative agent impacting the landscapes and the human bodies in the course of generations, the extractive industry and its logic contribute to define the geological timescale of the Anthropocene. While by her own admission, Nkanga is not interested in the Anthropocene debate, her work is fundamentally engaging with the geological timescales activated by the extraction economies. To quote the artist herself, and I quote, "Do we even consider that these places are somehow connected? That when a landscape gets mutilated in Namibia, its rocks shattered, an emptiness manifests someplace else?" End of quote. Such emptiness, that we can call the malaise of extraction, is a byproduct of what T.J. Demos has recently called the violent transformation of life into commodities, and it is itself a mode of necropolitics. This governance of the dead and the dying includes the transformation of habitats like the Mediterranean Sea or the Veneto region or the Niger's Delta into the sacrifice zones of extraction. In this context, I consider the contrast evoked by Barca Nostra and Veins Aligned capable of leading us to the realization that ultimately extraction is about the conversion of life worlds into death worlds. And the way this conversion becomes perceptible to us is where the visual conflict of the Anthropocene is contested today. A mega event like the Biennale of Venice, although criticized and affected by curatorial politics because of its global reach and significance, can offer insight on the reception, dissemination, and popularization of Anthropocenic visualizations, as the visual arts today are still playing a major role in producing new knowledge and constructing new critical images of the Earth and the Anthropocene on multiple scales.
My name's Ifor Duncan. It was early evening when we arrived at the Migrant Cemetery, a fenced area overlooking Sidero, a majority Turkish Muslim village around 20 kilometers from the river on the Greek side of the border. Except for the fencing, there was little on the hillside to suggest that this field was a site of border violence. The cemetery is no longer in use due to claims that unidentified people have been buried here in mass graves. On the day of our visit in February 2019, 6 empty graves dug months before in anticipation of the unidentified bodies of people found in the river were still flooded by winter rainwater. We, my colleague Stefanos Levidis and myself, used the hydrophone to record inside these empty graves. The recording is almost silent. The only noise present is the buzz of the gain being turned up in the effort to identify any possible signal. Why we made the recording and what it means has been a constant question for me ever since. These empty graves were dug for a group of people that never came, or for those who survived. They speak to death as a constant presence, as something to be anticipated at the border. Perhaps the silence gestures towards a river turned into a weapon. The Evros-Meric-Maritsa is the second longest river in the Balkans, running for most of its 530 kilometers through Bulgaria as the Maritsa, before forming the Evros in Greek, or Meric in Turkish, for its final 218 kilometers. This final stretch is frequently referred to as a natural border between Greece and Turkey. The river has remained the boundary since its delimitation by the 1923 Lausanne Peace Treaty. In recent years, it has become an established route for refugees traveling through Turkey into the EU. Border crossings increase between April, when the river's spring floods recede, and November, when temperatures drop to between 7 and -1 degrees centigrade. After the floods, bodies re-emerge from the river amongst the sediment banks and islands of the delta, where the river empties into the Aegean. The still water in the empty graves at Sidero contribute to a mournful atmosphere and remain as unintentional memorials to those buried close by, those still submerged and yet to surface, and those continuing to cross the turbulent currents. Reflecting the historic tension between Greece and Turkey, the river continues to be shadowed by a military buffer zone, extending as far as the main roads and railway line at the edge of the floodplain. Access to the buffer zone is tightly controlled, and photography is prohibited, creating a scarce image regime and limitations for both research and reportage. This scarcity of images further contributes to an ambiguous frontier zone, with gaps in knowledge within which states enact violence with impunity. Indeed, far from natural, I argue that the blurring of the floodplain and the military buffer zone produces an entire ecosystem as a fluvial border technology, from the waters within the river to the mud of the floodplain, the fog that hangs above the valley at night and in the morning. Each of these elements form what I will introduce briefly today, the weaponization of water as a necrohydrology. In other words, a knowledge and practice of water that is not vital, but is itself attuned to death. Through the concept of necrohydrology, I bring together literatures from fields such as hydrosociality, hydrofeminism, and decolonial spatial and cartographic methods. In different ways, each conceives of the relational and pervasive capacities of water in circulations between water bodies, meteorology, and the implications these have with the porous boundaries of skin. What feminist theorist Astrida Neymanis calls bodies of water in her 2017 book of the same name. Such ways of thinking see society as co-constituted with the water with which it exists, and shift focus to consider physical environments as primarily constructed through the wet rather than the dry, or the boundaries between the two becoming more indistinct. I bring these fields together to identify cases where the knowledge and corresponding management of water is not vital, but is itself adversarial to life. I argue that it is with such ways of thinking with water, to echo the title of Melanie Chen, Janine MacLeod, and Neymanis' seminal 2013 book, outside of orthodox hydrological science, that the true scope with which water is mobilized against marginalized communities becomes perceptible. Necrohydrology, of course, owes a debt to political philosopher Achille Mbembe and his concept of necropolitics. The concept is developed, quote, to account for the various ways in which our contemporary world weapons are deployed in the interest of maximally destroying persons and creating death worlds, that is, new and unique forms of social existence in which vast populations are subjected to living conditions that confer upon them the status of the living dead, end quote. This is no more evident than in the case of state borders. At the Evros, it is not only in the removal of access to water as a resource that such death worlds are created. Indeed, as with other border rivers, the very weaponization of the Evros dates back to the original decision to demarcate the border along the river. This decision changes the way humans encounter it. Rather than primarily being life-giving, environments of socio-cultural connection, the characteristics of water, such as flow, turbulence, and flood that we all know, are conditioned so that they are encountered as hostile. In this way, once the river has been demarcated as a border, to convert it into a weapon can be as simple as letting the river flow. Indeed, as is evident across many borderscapes, when security apparatuses let things happen, this is paradoxically the very abdication of care that makes people die. This is what it means when a river is conditioned as a necrohydrology. The identification of a relational space, such as a river basin, as a border, speaks to what Mbembe calls borderization, asking what the intention is of, quote, transforming certain spaces into impassable places for certain classes of populations. What is it about, if not the conscious multiplication of spaces of loss and mourning, where the lives of a multitude of people, judged to be undesirable, come to be shattered, end quote. Necrohydrology at the Evros spans beyond the impassable banks of the river, to which border crosses are directed, to the entire river basin, incorporating the mud in the fields that weighs asylum seekers down, or, as described by Q, a refugee we interviewed in Athens, the cold fog that hangs above the valley at night, making border crossers wet and cold, and contributing to risks of hypothermia. Perceiving these elements as weapons makes it possible to identify the ways river management produces impassable spaces in the, to echo Mbembe, shattering of the lives of those deemed undesirable. For example, the construction of a 12-kilometer fence in 2011 directed asylum seekers to points in the river where the flow rate is perilously strong and unpredictable, while flood defense walls double up as military infrastructure. In March, an atmosphere of terror was produced by detention center guards who claimed that dams upstream in Bulgaria would be opened to catastrophically flood the river and make it impossible to cross. In each of these cases, the perception of the river as a wholly natural environment becomes an apparatus of state ambiguity, or, as political scientist Roxanne Lynn Doty termed in a 2011 article, the space of moral alibi. What I've tried to show here are the ways that states, such as Greece, outwardly and discursively maintain divides between land and water, nature, culture, citizen and other, whilst always already operating at relational and dispersed registers. Furthermore, to confront the far-right paramilitaries that assembled at the Evros earlier this year to hunt and disappear migrants, as they termed it, in, quote, night and in the fog, evoking the old Nazi directive Nacht und Nebel, and to counter the tactics long deployed by the police in their use of the river as alibi, requires perceiving the extent of the elements of the river incorporated in the violence of the border. This, in turn, involves a mode of perception that senses water exactly beyond the river channel, as clearly as it sees water flowing between the riverbanks themselves. A perception that understands the river as a spectrum, as dew in the field, as freezing fog, oxbow lakes, as mud and thorns in the riverbanks, and carried on the clothes of the very bodies forced to swim across. This mode of perception understands borders beyond the cartographic lines that power chooses to represent itself, but as an always already expanded material and infrastructural spectrum of power, experienced as a space pervaded by violence. I came to this research because it seemed to me that people dying in rivers around the world didn't matter. The response was itself a silence. My questions came after this unequivocal and horrifying fact. To perceive the river in such ways not only enables an awareness of how violence is perpetrated through environments, but also offers the tools to construct possible future societies in ways that are inclusive, productive, and hopeful, exactly through their engagement with water as truly vital once more. It is towards such ends that we intend to contribute during our fellowship. Thank you very much.
And I'm so pleased to see, as we gather here, that Ocean Space has become a real university campus. And as we know, a campus is nothing but a campo, no? A campo, a place for cultivating knowledge. And the cultivation of ocean knowledge has already begun through your presence and through being here with us. So thank you so much, and that is the beginning of a long trajectory of hopefully working and thinking together. My short addition today, and I try to be very short, I know time is running out, is I just want to, of course, celebrate with you the beginning of an amazing university trajectory and many possible future projects to come, but also think with you, with a nod to the city in which we are, of a new Mary-tory. And what I mean by that is a new territory of the mare, a Mary-tory, and one where possibly we can celebrate the marriage to the sea as a way of communally engaging with the place and the oceans around us. And the Mary-tory that I mean is also a reference, of course, to the legal structures through which we operate and the oceans are being framed today. Or I think as Sasha had it when she said, what worlds make laws? And just a short quote to place us here in Venice, and sorry, you know so much more about Venice, so being an outsider, allow me to sort of connect and situate myself. But by reading Peter Ackroyd's Venice biography, I came across this really beautiful passage where he writes, in the Ducal Palace, so that's a quote, the seat of the Magistrato alle Acque was adorned by an inscription stating that the city of Venice, benefiting from divine providence, was founded in water, surrounded by water, with water for walls. Thus, whoever might dare, in whatever way, to bring injury to these waters must be judged enemy of his country. It ended with the declaration that this law has been reckoned eternal. So returning to our present moment, I'd like to direct our attention to a major legal battle unrolling at this very moment and concerning the ocean. And I'm referring, as some of you know, to the Intergovernmental Conference under the United Nations Conventions of the Law of the Sea on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. Long title, some people call it the Paris Agreement of the High Seas and for the High Seas. And what is being hotly debated, and that's why I bring it up today in our sort of wonderful gathering, are two contradictory principles regarding the management and the safeguarding of the high seas. The principle of freedom versus the common heritage of mankind, or as we would like to have it, of humankind. Freedom, as in free for all, implies that everyone can make use and exploit the riches of the high seas. The principle of the common heritage, applied to the so-called area of the ocean floor and subsoil, on the other hand, implies a redistribution of assets. So if organisms, for instance, extracted from the area are recognized as the common heritage of humankind, developing countries will be entitled to share in the benefits. A fairer deal, it seems, and yet it begs the question, is that the only way we understand the common heritage of humankind? Are organisms nothing else but exploitable material? The UN Close Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Treaty was named the Once and Future Treaty, representing the renewed attempt at finalizing a comprehensive ocean government regime and filling the gaps left behind the first attempt in 1982. We know that already the oceans has soaked up about 1/3 of roughly 40 billion tons of CO2 emitted annually. Also, 93% of the extra heat from climate change. So while this has tempered climate change on land, it has caused the oceans to warm. But what is also at stake in what is being discussed at the moment are issues such as deep sea mining, marine protected areas, ocean pollution, and issues of equally large magnitude. So while a new ocean regime is on the negotiation table, one on which the future of the oceans and the future of the planet will largely depend on, we are invited collectively to ponder what a new maritory could be. One perhaps where being eternally married to the sea can resonate with the seas becoming a territory of their own rights. And why am I bringing this up? I believe that the common heritage of humankind has a lot to do with humanity and a lot to do with the humanities, which of course is somehow the core discipline from which some of our thinking starts from. And I'm also arguing, as Shaul has and many of you have, that thinking across our disciplines in issues of humanity's future matters greatly, and that, producing various translations, misunderstandings, interpretations, visions of these concepts can be very productive in guiding our futures. So if I invoke our thinking with the law of the seas, I invite my friends, the oceans, its marvelous inhabitants, the amazing young scholars who have started this amazing wet trajectory, in this exceptional program, the university, the rectoressa, the professore, tutti, please to think with us, because a lot is at stake in the moment. Thank you so much.
very sorry because probably we're going to need yet another microphone in 30 seconds, because I just want to say that the new master's degree in environmental humanities, as I said, is drawing together 7 departments, but it has its home in the departments of Asian and North African studies. So I really want to thank the director, Professor Markus Chiesa, for making that home available. With him, I thank all the staff. It's sometimes we tend to forget that a program is not only the scholars, the professors, and the students, but also the staff that puts a lot of the administrative work. So I also want to thank them wholeheartedly. And from the same department, in conclusion, I'm so happy. She will be greatly missed in the board of the Center of the Humanities and Social Change, where with Massimo Varlian and Sabrina Marchetti, who have worked so well together. But of course, it's also a great privilege and great satisfaction that Tiziana Lipiello is our new rector, so I invite her to give some closing remarks. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Daniela, for your wonderful keynote speech. So I have the privilege tonight to address the closing remarks on the official inauguration of the MA program in Environmental Humanities. This program was a challenge for us, but we believe in its strength and future perspectives, especially because it is strongly connected with this environment and the unique city of Venice, the region, the nation, and it can become an example of sustainability of a city like Venice in Europe and in the world. This MA program is already proving to be successful by the presence of all these students. This is the first year, and we already have students from Italy and beyond, and from the scholars who chose Foscari, but chose also Venice. I heard your project, and they are really connected with the city. I am very confident that the MA program may become an international arena for attracting students in a unique lab like Venice in the future, in the fields of cultural heritage, contemporary art, and environmental sciences. This program may not have been possible without our Center for the Humanities and Social Change, and without the cooperation with the new institute. I'm very grateful to Erk for his support and sincerity in promoting us and prompting us to work on our reputation, even today, on our values, our strong points, and our weak points. Yesterday and today I had the pleasure to talk to Francesca, to George, Christophe, Charlotte, Will, Krul, and Christophe, and I'm very confident that the fellows and students will do their best to be successful and be our ambassadors in the world. In conclusion, I'm grateful to you, to the new institute, and I hope we can still have your trust and support in the future. Thank you.